the people and just said to them, actually, every time you see a male-born baby, you must chuck it into the river. Because and so he just actioned this. And so you would have been in this place of every Egyptian who bought into what Pharaoh was saying, and I think most of them would have had to for sake of their lives. Every time they heard a baby crying or saw one, they were given the go-ahead, and there would have been the military as well. Throw these babies into the river to drown. Absolutely terrible state of affairs. And so that's where we pick up the story today. And this is what it says. We're going to read together. Now, a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman, part of one of the tribes of Israel. The woman conceived and bore a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, a good-looking kid, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes, daubed it, covered it with bitumen and pitch to make it waterproof. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. And his sister stood a distance to know what would be done to him. Verse 5, now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river while her young women were walking beside the river. She seized this basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. Not surprising for what's happened to that kid. She took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then his sister, who'd been standing a little bit of a way off, said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the child went and got Moses' mum and brought her. And the Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. At the time, the Jewish people were in slavery, and so just to be offered wages was astounding. So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, because she said, I drew him out of water. And so in the midst of this terrible period, there's a couple that's married, and she's now pregnant and has this child. Now, I would imagine that this probably happened before Pharaoh actioned the death of babies, because I don't know many people who would say, man, I would just love to celebrate getting married and having a child in the midst of the onslaught that was happening. So I have a feeling that in the story, this has already happened when it's actioned. And so this has happened. She's expecting a baby. She gives birth, and she manages to hide her child in a community where there would have been slave drivers and military and Egyptians milling around. She manages to hide her baby for 3 months. People who've had kids would know in itself that is a huge undertaking already. Imagine the crying, old school nappy, changing, cleaning, feeding, trying to sleep, all in silence so that nobody knows, making sure that no guards or prying Egyptian eyes catch this lady out with this baby son. Amazing the lengths she went to, which is what we would do for our children. But I want us to just quickly stop for a moment, and we read the story from a distance, but it's good for us to realize that right now, if you're in Gaza, if you're in parts of Ukraine, if you're in Sudan, Somalia, slums across the world, drug lord-controlled areas, squatter camps in our city, that you're facing the kind of things that lady might have faced. There's people who are married, who have children, who are worried about the livelihoods of their kids in the midst of the most depraved situations. And it's easy for us to stand aside and be a bit distant in our safe, comfortable lives. But I think God today would want us to say, as we sang there, God, would you break our hearts for what people are going through? It's the rain of heaven, manna falling down. That was just so weird. It's through this light fixture, I think. But anyway, I'll take it, unless there's someone up there. It's probably a rat causing problems, saying something that I shouldn't be. And the Lord's like, oh, change it up. So I want us to be a people who continually ask God to help us to remember and see with His eyes what people, what individuals, what families are going through, to identify with them and to support in any way we can, to not harden our hearts to the mess of the world, but to get our hands dirty. There was a lady, I've forgotten her name, she worked with the addicts. I'm looking at Sarah because I'm trying to work out if she remember, but it might have been Amy Carmichael. I'm not sure. Probably. Thank you so much. Well done. That's the one. I got it wrong. And she said, as Christ followers, it's easy for us to have hard hearts and soft hands. Hardened to the brokenness of this world and going, we don't want to get our feet or our hands dirty. What God calls us to have is soft hearts and hard hands, as in we're prepared to have soft hearts and we're prepared to get our hands dirty for the sake of the kingdom. That's what he calls us to. So back to the story. As the baby grows, this mum just can't keep her son hidden anymore. And so she hatches a plan. She's like, this baby of mine is not getting thrown into the river. And so as a last-ditch attempt to save him, I'm going to make this basket that's going to hopefully protect him for a bit. I'm going to make a baby boat, and I'm going to place this in the reeds. Now, I don't think that it was accidental of where she placed her baby, because if she was looking to go, what's any chance of survival, it wasn't to just let this baby float down the river, otherwise she wouldn't place the baby in the reeds. And I think that everybody would have known where Pharaoh's daughter and where the ladies used to walk. And so I think this mom sits and goes, if my child is to survive, maybe, just maybe, the only hope is that there's compassion of another woman, of other ladies, and this baby is saved. This is my assumptions. But I think if I was a mom, I would be trying to hatch a plan like that. And so this is what she does. And she's got a daughter, and the daughters were safe at that time. And she says, okay, can you stand a little bit further apart so it doesn't maybe look like I'm too involved in this process, and just see what happens when the ladies come down. But I just want us to imagine the moments of that mom sending away her baby. Going, I don't think there's any other hope. But if you're a mom here today, I don't think we can comprehend what it would be like to put your baby in a boat and put the baby in the reeds to go. They're either going to die of the elements, or maybe they're going to be saved. But this is the only way out compared to them getting thrown into the river to drown. I just can't comprehend what was going through her. Immensely difficult. Sort of just going, God, you're my only hope, and his life is genuinely in your hands. And that's the only place to be. And friends, we aren't in that position today. But what we do need to know is that emotionally, physically, and spiritually, we need to entrust our children to God. I prayed it. We're not in the place of having to give our kids away because they're at threat of death. But as parents, we have to recognize that their ultimate parent is the Father. That's the ultimate parent. And we can live our lives trying to protect our kids and make sure everything's okay, and make sure for their future everything's going to be okay in a physical sense. And that's important, that's good, that's what we're called to do. But we just need to remember that actually we look after them on behalf of the Father. And he's actually the one who truly rules and reigns and who loves them more than we ever could. And the best place for our kids, I think it was mentioned in the Connect group sharing, the best place for our kids is to be in a family unit where God's kingdom is prioritized. Because when they're in that place, then everything else flows from that. And so that's how this lady was living. So Pharaoh's daughter sees the basket. She hears the wailing. And we don't know the age of Moses' sister, but she's brave, and she stands up when she sees this. And she says, hey, do you know what? I know somebody who can look after this baby for you. And of course, it's going to be her mom. But that was huge bravery from a child to actually walk into the presence of Pharaoh's daughter and to step into the mix and to say, I'm prepared to do that. And it's another reminder that our children can do an awful lot more for the kingdom than we often give them credit for. And they can do a lot, and God's called them to a lot. And so she's spotted, and what comes out of this is that actually the mom who's a slave becomes a paid worker in Pharaoh's household. Absolutely wonderful. But then this difficult moment would have come again. She nurses and looks after her baby, and now she has to give her baby afresh, actually into sort of an adoptive scenario to Pharaoh's daughter. And he would now grow up without her. We don't know how old he was. He would have been weaned, but we don't know how old he was and whether he would even remember who his mom was at that time. But she's had these extra moments with him. She hands over her son. And he was alive when others were dead. He had been saved. It makes me think of Mary, Jesus' mother, raising him. But that point in time and that recognizing from her that actually she was giving him away to his mission on earth at a young age. And actually it would have been a very difficult thing. Makes me think some of you might know the story of Hannah and Samuel giving her son to the work in the temple. But more than that, it's the Father giving his son, God the Father giving his son to us for the mission that he called him to. So it's huge to remember. Verse 11, we'll carry on. One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and he looked on at their burdens. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and he hid him in the sand. When he went out next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, "Hey, what are you doing? Why are you striking your companion?" And this guy answered, "Who made you a prince and judge over us? Do you mean to kill us as you killed the Egyptian that he thought he had done in secret?" Then Moses was afraid, and he thought, "Surely this thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. Moses fled from Pharaoh, stayed in the land of Midian. I mean, we must remember that Moses now, we estimate him to be about 40, had lived in the Pharaoh's house with everything possible at his disposal. The greatest nation at the time lived in absolute luxury. He would have known he was adopted. He looked different. He was Jewish. He's living in the house of Egyptians. He would have looked different. He knew he was adopted. Pharaoh's daughter would have known the same as well. She knew the story. But he still cares about his people. He recognizes, I'm different, and he sees the people who look like him and the Jewish people being mistreated, terribly mistreated in slavery. It's wonderful that his grand life had led him not to be callous towards the pain of others. He wasn't happy to stay within the large walls of comfort, but as I said earlier, is willing to get his hands dirty. And so he walked amongst the people. He would have seen this as a son in Pharaoh's household. And so he sees this moment, and they're in pain, and rage and passion, and just gets the better of him, and he just kills this Egyptian in his fit of rage as he's hurting someone that he cares about. And he quickly makes a plan, and he hides it, and he covers it up. But our sin will always catch us up. The mess of our lives will always catch us up. We can try and hide it. We can hide it from people. We can never hide it from God, but we can try and hide it from people. But there's going to be guilt that destroys us. And as people, we need to keep bringing things to the light. But this is what happens to Moses. And while he's trying to hide it, his own people sell him out. Obviously, somebody spotted him. He thought he looked this way and that, but somebody spotted him, and he ends up being seen by people later on, and suddenly he's in fear, and he's like, everybody now knows, and it's getting through the whole city, and suddenly Pharaoh knows about it as well. And in a fury, the fact that the son or a grandson in his household would kill an Egyptian, one of his own, and would save these worthless slaves, he's in a fury as well, and he's after his grandson because of this. How could my grandson kill an Egyptian, one of my people? And so he hears Pharaoh's after him, and he runs for his life. We're not exactly sure how long it took him to get to Midian and how far exactly, but estimates that we can find is 300 k's. So weeks, maybe at least a week, depending on how fast he could get there, depending on how much food he had or how many supplies he could gather. But he fled, and he fled far. He was just like, people are after me because I killed someone, I'm a murderer. The whole nation of Egypt is searching for me, and he probably used all of his military training he had and everything he had to evade people finding him, because I'm sure Pharaoh went hard after him. But he managed to get 300 odd k's away to the land of Midian. And so he manages to do a little bit of an escape. I wonder, in his time in Midian, I think he would have felt, I'm done with my previous life. Nobody's going to find me. I'm ready to start anew. I hope no one is ever going to find out what happened to me before. But he wanted to start over. And friends, I wonder how many of us have a past that we're ashamed of. Things that we've said and things that we've done that we just wish that we could take back, as Moses wished he could have as well. God sees it all. He loves us in spite of our mess. He forgives us, but he also asks us to deal with our mess, which is what he would have been asking Moses to do. And these few verses that we've looked at, both God saving Moses as a baby and saving Moses as an adult as well, they show God's providence, his rulership over this world and our lives. He had a plan and purpose for Moses' life. He supernaturally saved him twice. God's always at work in his great story. We don't know why he didn't stop the murders of all those babies at that time, but he did preserve Moses' life. We don't know why he took so long to act, but he did act. We don't know why he does and doesn't do things we expect in this lifetime in our lives personally. But one thing is for sure, is that he's always at work. He is on the throne, and one day he will make all things right. And you and I can trust him, that he's at work in the good, he's at work in the hardest of situations. And the proof of that is the death of his son. The cross was the most horrific place in all of history. Someone innocent nailed to death in the most gruesome of ways. It was the very worst, but it was the very best, because it's where God's love and as payment for sin, collided with the greatest evil of this world. So last bit, I'll close. A few minutes left together. So Moses sits down at the well. It says, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water. They filled troughs with water to feed their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, how is it that you have come home so soon today? They said, an Egyptian, because that's what Moses looked like, how he dressed. An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock. He said to his daughters, then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. He may have dinner with us. And Moses was content to dwell with this man. He gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, called him Gershom, for he said, I've been a sojourner in a foreign land. And so at some point, it's probably not immediately, he's been living in Midian. At some point, Moses sits at the well, and these were common places to find water for people as well as for the flocks that they had in these areas. And with limited water available, those who pushed their weight around usually won. The male shepherds usually won against ladies trying to get water for their flocks or for their families. And so Moses sees some ladies being pushed aside by the shepherds. He stands up for them. And maybe they were beautiful. We don't know. But he thought it was time to impress. We don't know. Maybe that was just his natural character as he stood in the gap for those Jewish people. But either way, he does what's right. The end result is he finds a family. And his father-in-law is a priest, and actually his name's also Jethro. We see later on in the story that he had a significant role in helping Moses act and operate wisely in the responsibility that God gave him. So we see immense wisdom. It's interesting, actually, that Isaac and Jacob in the story also found wives as a result of them or servants sitting by the well and offering help to ladies in need. And so men at Hope, if you're looking for a godly wife, you need to find a borehole that ladies come to and be present and offer help. We don't operate like that today, but I would suggest men, and I know there's some great godly men here and godly ladies as well, that being here at church and in the midst of church life is a great place to start in looking for a lady. But then when you see those ladies, don't act in arrogance. Act as servant-hearted men, humble, stand up for what's right. We haven't done a series on it, but maybe we will soon. So Moses is settled, the past is behind him. He's in this household, he gets married, he has children, he's got a great family. Surely God wouldn't take him back. He probably thinks in his mind, it's a long distant past. Surely the place of great pain and sadness for me would never be how God wants to use me going forward. Surely he would not use me to help in that situation and the slavery of an entire nation. He was hiding. He was a murderer after all. He was sort of half Jewish and half Egyptian, didn't really fit in with either. Felt he didn't really fit. But God always has plans for our lives that we don't expect. And he always uses the unexpected people of this world to bring about unexpected results. That's the God that we serve. And so I'll close with this. Verse 23. During those days, the king of Egypt died. The people of Israel groaned because of their slavery. They cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. He heard their groaning. He remembered his promises, his covenant to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. In the background, whilst Moses was charting his new life, the past behind him, the great Father was looking in. He saw and he knew. He was working his plan of rescue for the Egyptian people, just as he worked his plan of rescue for you and I by sending Christ that he planned before the foundation of the world. God hears, and today his ears are not deaf to you. His eyes are not blind to you and to what you're going through today, this week, at the moment. He knows what you're going through, and he will work, and he will act at the right time. Should we stand and pray?